If you are watching this video, then you know what it is like to experience affect. Principally, in this case, seeking in Panksepian terms. There is a whole colourful spectrum of affect. We feel joy when we're socially enriched, or sad when things don't transpire the way that we desire. We owe all of our creative enterprises, our art, myths, stories, and even technological advancements to the emotional experience and drive of being human. Emotion is a language all of its own. An experience of feeling can communicate far more intentionality and meaning than words ever could. It is the language of our instincts. We know from affective neuroscience and neuropsychoanalysis that consciousness is always affective, insofar as affect is 2 milliseconds faster than cognition. Thinking is, quite literally, an afterthought. Thus, when it comes to frustration, or so-called neurosis, to understand the intentionality of affect is much of the work of readapting to our lifespan development. Today, we present to you a narration of a text dialectic on the practicalities of this process, of riding the affect carrier wave of instinct to understand its intentionality, between Steve Richards and a couple of members of our Jung To Live By Discord community. Steve has been using the knowledge shared within this video clinically for over 40 years to help people improve their internal relating, and we are delighted to share it with you. We hope it gives you a new tool for your relational toolkit. A question is asked. Can you clarify how to know if you are experiencing an instinct or just feeling other emotions and sensations? What are the markers, phenomenologically, of instincts? Steve replies, you have to seek them out, which is what they want. Affect-toned ideas, which are constructs, often psychosocially introjected through suggestion, are not affective in an effective sense. The way to know is to do and keep doing until we adjust sufficiently to understand the context that beckons. Remember, affect is the carrier wave of instinct. So, it follows that it is instinct in the broadest sense, rather than Panksepian only, that is behind the signal that is the affective wave. Urgency in the drive loading, or libido, of such a signal is indicative of the degree of ego unconsciousness of the instinct or instincts in question. Ride the return wave respectfully and follow a paced and mannered protocol request to be allowed to understand. Someone else then asks a question. You said, do, keep doing, seek them out. By your phrasing, do you mean learning via feedback from active engagement in the world? When I read your phrase, affect-toned ideas, I think about ideas or goals that one creates which have some emotion tied to it. For example, working out and connecting with one's body, for me, had a powerful motive to it. Creating that habit and doing it is what really, over time, connects said person to what is underneath. Steve then replies, affect-toned ideas, in the context that I mentioned, are inflationary rather than relationally effective. This happens when the self-concept acquires through learning certain ideas it identifies with, which, due to their expansion and inertia within the self-concept, stop real internal relating. What you describe is more like the experience of the ego receiving an affect signal, that is, an instinctive confirmation of a state from within. This is a normal, homeostatic interaction between ego consciousness and the genome with their different modalities of consciousness. To go further, we need to ride the carrier wave back towards the very wide context of instinct itself, within which gene expression can meet ego as an active, dual aspect consciousness of understanding. The question asker then replies by asking for a clarification on the connection between, specifically, the drive that is being felt and the action that one carries out. For example, is consistently showing up and carrying out a habit, such as going to the gym, the linking of the intentionality of the genome with a certain action that the understanding being spoken of is referring to? Steve replies, "Thanks. The real key at this point is to model for the ego, by the ego, what the perception of the ego must be like from the perspective of the genome. This is an uncommon frame shift, as habitually the ego tends to see everything externally as a projection of itself, long before it can see others and the world context of those others as they really are. Internal projection likewise occurs, and the ego sees the non-ego objective psyche and its context, the biologos of the genome and its instincts, as being a mirage of itself. But what does the genome think of the ego? To attempt this ego waveform collapse into anything useful, it, the ego, has to surrender its supposedly privileged position, including those faculties it uses and values so much. Its literal sense apperception of itself by itself. In order to intuitively adopt the position of instinct and genome, we have to first understand that ego cognition is only one mode of consciousness. Affect, the carrier wave of instinct, is an a priori primordial form of consciousness that is in the service of the genome and its gene expression. So, we must enter into true affect, not the downstream cognitive ego modelling of affect that normally passes for this. This is achieved by practicing dissociation and reassociation via competence in the induction of controlled trance states within ourself. Affective consciousness, which is active and not, as many Jungians believe, a passive receptive ego experience, is then available to ride the carrier wave away from the ego and towards the dynamic, systematized context that is the representation of the genome's teleology, the instincts. The genome interprets its environment and continually modifies its gene expression. Instincts of a Panksepian kind serve to extend biological homeostasis by impelling action in the world to meet internal needs. There are, however, other instincts which are different in kind. These are developmental, are anticipatory, and are expressed on a time-release basis over the arc of lifespan development. Before they are activated, they are unavailable to consciousness and behaviour. They switch on homeostatically when the self-regulation of the genome determines that they must. They are often rehearsed ahead of full deployment and tested against the environment. The final release is under full-blown instinctive pressure, drive and libido towards the ego and its evaluation of the realities of the external world. Because the genome monitors the environment continuously, it has consciousness as informational representation and exchange along the spectrum of adaptation that it carries as innate anticipations. These include a model of expected ego development in service of optimal adaptation. The pressure from the genome to actualize this is the Jungian drive towards individuation. The genome's consciousness of itself and its aims, teleologically, are systematized into those instincts that represent entire situations, including acceptable, if suboptimal, tolerances, as well as the best possible fit between genomic potential and the environment. Instincts appear as whole narrative-based scenarios, packed with libido and confirming reward system, affect. In humans, they have evolved in lockstep with our enlarged brain and appear in consciousness as Jungian-styled archetypal images. Jung, who did not have the advantage of the latest understanding of genetics and of instincts, was, nevertheless, ahead even of Panksepp in saying that, quote, "the archetypes are the instinct's perception of itself," end quote, i.e., capable of knowing itself. This self-consciousness innate within instincts reflects that which produces and regulates them, the genome itself. Affect, we understand from firstly Jung and from Panksepp and Solms, is conscious and delivers transduced information from the genome via the ego and its behaviour into the world and back again. So, we must enter the non-ego consciousness of affect and drive via dissociated but observed and experienced consciousness into instinct, and there meet, as fundamental as is possible, the genome itself. Dissociation, through skill in hypnosis, in all of its forms, is both the natural and indeed the only way to achieve this. Ego fantasies about itself never escape ego-reductive inflation. You have to get outside of it, the ego, to get truly inside your genomic self.